Armies or that Deathwing army that you mentioned. Anyone who's going to deep strike on the board, there's no one deployed, they're just going to come down from space all around you. So there's a lot of advantages to armies like that. You know, you can't, all these things we just talked about with deployment, and those are only 2 deployment tactics, there's a million other ones too. Those don't apply if the guy's not on the board and you don't know where he's going to go. So, however, there are things you can do with your deployment, even though he's not there, in order to anticipate the drop, you know, anticipate the coming storm, as it were. So the first one I'll show that applies specifically to Dark Eldar is called, I call it going along for the catching when they're playing outfield. So with deep striking armies, you basically got 2 choices. You can kind of hunker down and try to, you know, build the defense so that when they drop on you, you absorb that damage and then counterattack. Or you can try to spread out and deny them drop zones so that you mess with their initial attack. They're more likely to come down scattered, and then you can concentrate on individual pieces of them and take them out. So going along for the catch is when you're going to spread out. So let's say I deploy right here. You know, I'm going first maybe. You know, he wants to. He hasn't come down yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread out my guys in such a way that I'm going to try to deny him as much board space as possible.
So you're designing a blanket.
Well, I'm basically trying to, you know, deny him, push him back, make him so there's less safe spaces to land. And let's say, you know, there might be some, like, let's say there are a couple objectives here or something, and that's the game. If I can force him to land away from the areas that are important for the game, be they good pieces of cover or explicit objectives, then that's a big advantage right off the bat. So going along for the catch means that you're not hunkering down and, you know, going to grin and bear it. You're going to spread out. You're going to take your licks, but you're going to ensure that he has to do risky drops if he wants to, you know, come down next to you. So basically, you know, turbo boost these guys over here. Kind of spread them out in a line. Do a nice little zigzag. Let's do this, and let's send this guy right over here. All right, so this is, you know, I have a relatively few amount of units. In an 1850 army, you'd have a lot more, basically. So you'd be able to cover even more of the game, of the board. But the basic idea is this, is that you want to cover the open spaces where they would like to land. You want to leave spaces kind of near the board edge, because if they deep strike near the board edge, that's inherently risky for them. And most people are going to be very hesitant on doing that. So that's the idea, is to deny them areas to land. So especially if you're fighting somebody like demons or deep striking Deathwing, who are not immune to mishaps. You know, if you're all on drop pods, then this still has value because you can force them to spread out, but they're not going to die by landing next to you. But if they can mishap, even Descent of Angels people, this is going to really make them think about where they're dropping. Because, you know, they've got this little area in here where they can drop. You know, if they land in the terrain, they might take some casualties, things like that. You know, if they land near the board edges, they're risking going off the board edge. So this has a lot of value to kind of mess with your opponent's head and, you know, put them, even though they don't have any models on the board, you have partially counteracted their deployment, as it were, by spreading.
If
yeah.
Go ahead.
For a deep striking army, not counting Blood Angels, but Descent of Angels, how big a spot should a deep striking army look for when they're going to play?
Well, the average scatter is 7 inches, right?
Okay.
With 2 dice, the average number you're going to roll is a 7. So you're usually going to move about 7 inches.
Okay.
And actually, in some cases, let's say there's a model right here. You're actually sometimes, with the way the math works out, is you're actually safer dropping closer to it because you're more likely to jump over. Just the way the 7 inches works out. But basically, 7 inches is the normal move. So if you're worried about deep strike mishap, be more than 7 inches away. And really more than 8 inches away because you can't get within 1 inch of it.
So you're really trying to leave about 6-inch pockets for them to trust the dice gods.
Exactly, because the average move is about 7. So if you leave about 6 or 7 inches between your guys, yeah, they can drop there. Like, you know, you put a squad here. If they hit, they're fine. But if they scatter, they're in trouble. And that's what you want to give them. You're never going to be able to cover the entire board. I mean, that's just not practical. But you can make them think about it. You can put them in danger when they're dropping. So that's the goal of this tactic. It's not so black and white in that you're going to actually catch the guys dropping. But you might get lucky. So, and even just 1 unit time like that.
What would you do if, say, Deathwing did land right there?
Right in here?
Where you originally...
Right in here?
Yes. Let's say they landed there. What would be your counter reaction to that?
The reason why that's okay is that let's say they land a squad here. Well, they're not going to fit more than one. You know, they're going to land one squad here. Okay, maybe they'll land one squad over here. Maybe they'll land one squad over here. And that's the idea of this tactic, is that you force them to spread out by dropping down.
So
and then what you can do, exactly. Then what you can do is you can pounce on these guys, you know, and then those guys are kind of out of it for a little while. at least in close combat, for assaults and things. So that's the advantage of forcing them to split up, is that they're not going to fit more than one squad in any given area. And they can still land on these difficult terrain pieces, and that's okay, but they might take some casualties from it.
So my kind of question with it is, I mean, in the case of this one, you're dealing with Dark Eldar, which is a fast army.
Right, sure.
So your initial deployment, you started them all off in the middle. But I'm assuming with a slower army, do you want to spread them out initially?
Right. So that
you're going to cover as much board as possible?
Exactly. So if you're anticipating, basically when the guy hands you his army list, you're going to know whether or not he's going to go all reserves, 9 times out of 10. Like, Descent of Angels army, okay. Like, they're all jump packs, what's going to happen? You can guess. It's demons, well, you know that, of course. So, yeah, initially, I actually do this most frequently with my salamanders and my space marines, where, you got a bunch of rhinos and stuff, and you spread it all the way here, and you drag them all 12, and you get out the guys, and you run all in one turn, and you can cover, even with a slow space marine army, I mean, you basically cover like half the board right away, and you ensure that they have to drop pretty far away from you. So you can do this with any army. I picked Dark Eldar because it's the most obvious example, because they move fast, and you can get the idea, but you can do it with anybody. I mean, even with Tyranids, like, you move up, you spawn gaunts, you run them. I mean, you can cover a lot of the board with most any army.
So if you were to just say you were going to put down Space Marines, you would leave them in the rhinos, run them up the field, then run. You wouldn't leave them outside to spread them out first and then walk them up the field?
It depends. Like, maybe there's an area of the board where you want to start one squad out, but you can actually get a lot of movement. You move up 12, disembark 3, run up to a 6. I mean, that's really fast. So I like doing that because then you can spread them all the way out. You can cover, all the way up to midfield. I guess in a general way, you've already kind of got this area covered because they don't want to drop through the board edge. So you don't need to worry so much about that. You're more worried about covering space that's further away. Just one way to think about it.
So if you were the drop army, you would want to try to catch your opponent by surprise by saying, "Oh, well, you don't think I'm going to do that."
Or choose to go first. Most drop armies like to go second because the guy wastes a turn, moving around. Well, this is a way to not waste that turn, and it's a reason why you might want to pick turn 1 if you're a drop pod army or something.
And I see people do that because you don't have to smoke on your rhinos, your vehicle, that type of thing.
Right, exactly. And let's say that the other guy gets first turn and he does this. Well, don't. Just because you can land close to him, don't necessarily take that temptation because you will be spread out. You should land all over here. Maybe you're further away.
Too after you deep strike him, right?
Well, you can run, yeah. So you can spread out a bit, yeah. But yeah, as a deep striking army, don't be tempted into spreading yourself out. Most deep striking armies don't want to do that. I mean, that's a blanket statement. That's not always going to be true. But most deep striking armies need to stay concentrated.
I think if I was the deep strike army, I'd want, if it was an objective army where you had to do objectives, I would want to go first anyway because I want to get as many of my guys on top of the objectives as possible.
And that's often the move. Well, it depends. I mean, that's the...
Keep them within reason, obviously. Don't leave yourself out in the open.
In general, a dropping army doesn't have a lot of mobility after they drop. So in general, you want to land on the objectives because you're not going to move a whole lot afterwards. So.
Okay, it depends on if you're shooty or assaulty. Like Space Wolf's assaulty, he wants to get up close. If you're shooting Marines, going back with your last cannons and blow them up or whatever you got.
Okay. I think what the general gist is you always give your opponent choices. Just you give him choices he doesn't want to make.
You're forcing him to make a decision. Yeah, you're forcing him to make a decision to deploy near the board edge, go in between those units. Yeah, yep, that's what you're trying to do. All right, so I'm really looking at you thinking, oh geez, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, and I think that's a good thing.
All right, so let's set up the circle the wagons. So this is one way to, basically the goal of this tactic is to deal with all deep striking enemies, right? That's what we're trying to do. So there's another way to do that, and it's kind of the opposite approach. So that last way is I'm going to spread out and I'm going to cover as much of the board as I can, and try to deny them drop zones. Well, the other one is to just kind of hunker up, real close, and batten down the hatches, as it were. And this is called circling the wagons. So let's assume that this is all painted the same thing. There's just a Space Marine army of one kind or another. So when you're going to circle the wagons deployment, and let's say, for example, the drop pod army won the roll to go first, and you know that they're coming down initially, so you're not going to have a chance to spread out and play the outfield, as it were. So what you need to do is you need to anticipate their drop and get ready for it. So the basic ways you do this are you make sure that with that initial drop, they can't hurt you too bad with their shooting phase. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to position my models such that, let's say I'm playing against a Descent of Angels army, for example, and I know they've got a lot of Melticons. So they're going to come down, they're going to drop all around me, and they've got pretty good shooting just on the turn that they drop. Well, what don't I want to happen? I don't want them to pop my Land Raider when they drop, because probably I've got some nasty counterattack unit in here. So the idea of this circling the wagons is literally you're probably going to build a circle. And you're going to do so with your most expendable / most durable units. So in this case, tactical Marines, just to say these are tactical Marines too. Rhinos are certainly more expendable than a Land Raider is. Things like that. And you're going to set yourself up such that when they drop, you can minimize the damage that they're going to do. That's the idea. So if you notice here, so the goal, and if I've done this right, and haven't cheated by moving more than 12, okay, good.
And what Ben's trying to, and the other thing is, people call it a bubble wrap, you know, creating this outer layer around his army, and really creating a bubble wrap.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's specifically for assaulting, but yeah. Okay, so what I've done here is that I've ensured that he can't get within 6 inches of my Land Raider on any side, right? And what's magical about 6 inches? Well, that's melta range for melta guns. And there's a hell of a lot of armies that have melta guns of some shape or variety. Like that's pretty common. So the idea is that I've circled the wagons and protected my most valuable unit, which is this Land Raider and Terminators, whatever's inside, whatever nastiness you've got in there. And I've made sure that they can drop and they can shoot at it, but they're not going to get multi-range. Or let's say that there was like a giant line of sight blocking building here. I positioned the Land Raider right here next to it, and I put all my other guys out right here, so there's nowhere they can land to both get line of sight and range, things like that. The basic idea is to protect the units you need to counterattack, whatever those may be, whatever your army happens to be. And then after they've dropped down, you surge out of your wagon circle and counterattack is the idea. So you can see this is the opposite approach to playing outfield. Playing outfield, we went broke and just flew all over the board to cover space. Here we're covering a very small part of the board and trying to maximize our durability. So it's 2 different approaches to the same problem. That's about it.
If you're trying to capture objectives with this tactic, you may be challenged at some point to get to those objectives, correct?
Well, this is turn 1, so you're probably still going to be okay. But that being said, build your wagon circle where it makes the most sense. So if all the objectives are over here, don't build your wagon circle in this corner. Build your wagon circle right over here. So that sort of thing. But you're right, and that's one of the things that should be going through your head when you're deciding whether to play outfield or to circle the wagons playing against an army like this. Is what's the overall goal here? What am I trying to do? And that should always be the context for your actions. Is all of these tactics are individual moves you can do in the course of a game, but which one is right for which situation depends on what the scenario is, what army you're fighting, what the situation on the board is. So take everything we say today with a grain of salt, because it's not like every situation, every game you should deploy like this. This is just one tool in your toolbox.
So if, for example, you're up against demons and you know that flamers are kind of come down, you probably want, if you're going to circle your wagons, to stick your hard shell on the outside and put your soft creamy filling behind it so that you're going to lose fewer.
If the flamers are coming down, you should get in that rhino. It's the bottom line. Don't be standing outside, especially if they've got some dances to make you bunch up.
But if you're trying to do this to protect, say, the Thunderfire, you circle around that so that they've got to try and get through. Whatever you
want to protect is what you circle around. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be whatever your nasty counterattack unit is. Because if they're dropping, they're probably going to be close to you, so you'll be able to go out and charge them. But yeah, if the Thunderfire Cannon happens to be the most useful in that scenario, then yeah, circle around that. That's what you should do.
Are you going to talk about timing that counterattack right?
We're going to talk a lot about different assault tactics. Not right here in the context of this. This is how do you survive the first turn, and then everything else.
Yeah, and really this is deployment. This is like what do you do if your opponent has drop pods or something.
I think that's one of the areas we struggle the most. I struggle the most is when to commit. When do you know when to not to pull the big punch or the big punch.
Yep.
And part of it is understanding your opponent's army list. What do they have? Yeah. I mean, you see those drop pods coming out. You know they're going to come at you. So.
Okay.
Depending on where the objectives are, would you ever make 2 wagon circles?
Oh, 2 different groups? Possibly, if you have enough units to do so. But it's going to be tough. I mean, if you're playing a Marine army, it's going to be tough to make 2 circles. Just because you're going to have a pretty low unit count. However, if the scenario allowed it, you could do in both corners, for example, and you got 2 sides covered for you right there. And if you're playing kill points or something, generally the right move, whoever you are, is to do wagon circle in the corner if you're going to do wagon circle, because you've already covered 2 of your sides. You need less units to do the rest of it. And then you can build, like two lines of defenses. Who you really need to die on the outside. Then you got the rhinos, then you got the Land Raiders. So the corners are a useful tool to do this, but that's only if you can afford to not be everywhere else on the board. So.
I think the next thing on our list is how to counter infiltrators. I guess there's really 2 types of infiltrators. One is being, of course, the assaulting kind that is like gene stealers or something that's going to come at you And then, of course, there's the infiltrators that are, you know, gonna shoot you, like a scout squad or something like that. You know, I see people using, like, if someone's gonna do a gene stealer, you know, they're gonna infiltrate, you know, either 12 if they can't see it, or 18 if they can, because I've seen people take the deployment and they'll deploy right to the 12 inches edge, right? And then, so they can force the opponent to be 18 inches, so you're really, you know, only another 6 inches in than their regular deployment. And then they move back so they can shoot you. I think that's one of the counters with infiltrators. Sometimes people like Marines or scout infiltrators, just so you can set them up and see where your opponent's tanks are or whatever to use. I think that's pretty infiltrators. I see a lot of people outflank instead of using infiltrate to round out. Any questions on infiltrating? We'll go to, I think the next list